Inspectors General have a long history dating to their pivotal role in the American Revolution. Like their forebears, modern IGs must deal with politics, personalities, and the fact that government often performs poorly. It's all detailed in a book called Watchdogs by former federal IG Glenn Fine, who joins me now in studio. Glenn, good to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And this book, what would you call it? There's a few scores settled, but there's also a bit of historical nonfiction, plus some really great anecdotes. How would you describe the book?
I wanted to write a book to describe the critical role of inspectors general. They have been called some of the most important public servants you've never heard of. I wanted to expose people to the critical check and balance they play in our government, and I believe they're a pillar of our democracy. So I do talk about my time as the Inspector General of the Department of Justice for 11 years and as the acting Inspector General of the Department of Defense, go through some of the investigations and the impact that they have, the history of IGs, as well as reforms to the IG system to make them even more effective.
All right. Well, that sounds like a good polished answer, but I want to get into, first of all, the tensions in the job. IGs have to interact and cooperate to some degree, I'm thinking, with the Government Accountability Office, Office of Special Counsel, as you say. It's a job with a lot of, balancing in human relations involved, too, isn't it?
Absolutely. IGs are not the only oversight entity in government, and we need to coordinate with the others. Government Accountability Office, as you said, the Congress, which does oversight, the courts, nonprofit groups, and it is a challenging role. You also have to keep the agency head fully informed of problems as well as the Congress. So that has been likened sometimes to straddling a barbed wire fence. It's a dual reporting requirement, and you have to be transparent and effective in communicating with all these other entities that have a similar role to IGs, but not the same role.
Right. Did you ever bump into, say, GAO and say, no, we're doing that? And they say, no, we're investigating it.
All the time. GAO, an arm of Congress, would do investigations at the request of Congress. Sometimes we were doing similar investigations, so we tried to coordinate with them. We did not want to duplicate their efforts or overlap with them because that would create a burden on the agency. And we did have a good relationship with GAO. They would try to deconflict the things they were doing with what we were doing. It wasn't always possible at all times because sometimes they were required to do it by Congress. But it was a good relationship. They have a very good head of the GAO, Gene Dodaro, who made it a point to try and coordinate and interact well with IGs, and he did.
All right, and you got into this in the time before the Internet, and you were an attorney and came into government as an IG at Justice Department, and there's a great anecdote about number 1044, which says a lot about the confirmation process at that time.
Right. So I was nominated to be the Inspector General by President Clinton in the year 2000. It was an election year. I got a hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee, voted out unanimously. I was told I might be confirmed when the Senate adjourned that year. The only problem was the Senate didn't adjourn that year before the election. It was the election between Al Gore and George W. Bush. After the election came the contest period. It was a contested election. That contest period went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Finally, the court determined no further recount, and George W. Bush was going to be the president. I thought all the nominations would die, and therefore I would have to start thinking about my next chapter, another job. But the last day of the Senate session, as I was packing to go home, I get a call from the official in the Office of Legislative Affairs in the Department of Justice, and she said, "Glenn, I heard there might be some confirmations of non-controversial candidates today, and you might be one of them." I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Well, how do I find out if I have been confirmed?" This was before constant C-SPAN coverage and the Internet, as you said. So she said, "Well, you're the 1044th nominee, presidential nominee this year. You're number 1044. Call this number, the clerk of the Senate, when you get home, and ask what happened to 1044. I said, "Really? Is that really the way you find out if you've been confirmed by the United States Senate?" And she said, "Yep, that's the best way now." So I went home, told my wife about it. She was very excited. She said, "Well, call." So I did. I called the number, and somebody picked up the phone and barked out, "Hello?" And I said, "Excuse me, could you tell me what happened to 1044? And he said, "Hold on a second." And he put me on hold. I was on hold for 10 minutes. Gets back on the line. He says, "What'd you want again?" I said, "Could you please tell me what happened to nominee 1044? And he said, "All right." And you could hear paper shuffling. Then he gets back on the line and says, "By the way, are you 1044? I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, congratulations, Mr. Fine. You've been confirmed to be the Department of Justice Inspector General by the United States Senate. Merry Christmas." Click. And he hung up the phone. So that's how I found out I was confirmed to be the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, a very august position.
Yes, we're speaking with Glenn Fine. He is the former Justice Inspector General and also former acting defense IG. And you had a lot to do at the Justice Department. FBI laboratory, that was a really interesting story in the book. And I can remember when that came to light of some of the mishandling and just poor management of the FBI's crucial laboratory. Tell us some of the highlights of that investigation.
So that investigation was conducted under the auspices of my predecessor, Michael Bromwich, a terrific IG. I came to the IG's office. One of the first things I did was interview one of the whistleblowers, an analyst in the laboratory who had complained of faulty scientific practices. We thought he was credible. Michael Bromwich opened a full investigation of the laboratory practices, hired several renowned scientists and assistant United States attorneys to look over the practices, and found very significant faulty practices, lack of documentation, inaccurate testimony, contamination, all sorts of problems that called into question the very important results of the laboratory in some of the most high-profile cases of the time, including the O.J. Simpson case, the Oklahoma City bombing case. And under Michael Bromwich's auspices, the team issued a report that made significant recommendations for improvement to the laboratory, including that it seek accreditation. As a result of this report and the recommendations, the laboratory did so. They changed its practices and ultimately did get accreditation, and also hired an outside scientist to lead the laboratory. So that was one example of the tremendous impact that IGs can have through their reports by looking at them objectively, credibly, and not pulling any punches, and that was an example of it.
And seeing some of these investigations, I mean, you hadn't been born yesterday, so to speak, when entering the Justice Department, but were you surprised at the scope and complexity of federal programs and operations, and also the degree to which they can really get off the rails?
Well, the Department of Justice is a huge operation. It's not just lawyers, as many people believe. Yes, it is lawyers in Main Justice and the U.S. Attorney's offices, but includes the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Administration, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, United States Marshal Service, Bureau of Prisons. And in an operation that complex and that size, there are going to be problems. That's why you need aggressive, independent oversight to audit, evaluate, and investigate the full range of operations throughout the entire Department of Justice, and that's what we tried to do.
And the Bureau of Prisons, I think, was vexing then. It's vexing the current IG, Michael Horowitz. It seems to defy, efforts at reform. But you did an investigation which shows that sometimes life can be in danger.
Yes, we have law enforcement agents in the IG's office who investigate corruption in the Bureau of Prisons, including sexual abuse of inmates, introduction of contraband, physical abuse of inmates. And we had an investigation that did result in the loss of life. It was an investigation that our Florida office did of a prison in Tallahassee where there was a ring of correctional officers who were sexually abusing female inmates and threatening them with retaliation if they came forward and reported it. Ultimately, they did. Our agents worked along with the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office and indicted 5 corrupt correctional officers. When we went to arrest them, it was decided it would be safest to do it in the prison, so we tried to arrest them when they were on duty. The first arrest of the first guard was done without incident. When our agents tried to arrest the second guard, came out from behind the reception desk, pulled out a gun from his gym bag, and guns weren't supposed to be allowed in the prison, but he pulled out a gun and started firing. He shot a lieutenant, a Bureau of Prisons lieutenant, and then he shot one of our agents who was stationed at the door. Our agent fell down, and before the correctional officer could shoot anybody else, he leaned back up, returned fire, shot the correctional officer, and then our agent leaned back down and died. He was a true hero. I talk about him in the book. His name is Buddy Sentner. And law enforcement agents in the IG's office and throughout the federal law enforcement community put their lives on the line in dangerous situations to protect. In my view, they are true heroes, as was Buddy Sentner.
My guest is Glenn Fine, former Justice Inspector General and acting defense IG, and the author of Watchdogs from the University of Virginia Press. And you left government and then came back as the acting defense IG, correct?
Correct. I was the Inspector General of the Department of Justice for 11 years, from 2000 to 2011. After that period of time, I thought change was good, both for me and also for the organization. Stepped down, landed a job at a big international law firm, Deckert. I did that for a few years, but then I guess I am a recidivist because it did not have the same satisfaction for me, and I wanted to get back into public service. And I took a job first as the Principal Deputy Inspector General of the Department of Defense IG's office. And then when the IG himself announced his retirement a few months later, I became the acting IG in 2016, where I remained for over 4.5 years until 2020.